Now that it's a little later in the season, if you don't have your corn and soybeans planted, or if you have to replant your corn and soybeans, you're probably wondering, all right, I'm past the ideal window, at least in most areas of the country. How do I still maximize yield?
Well, there's certainly some management practices that you can do that can influence yield later in the season. For example, as we narrow up row spacings, as we increase plant population, we've got a faster time period that we're going to go from seed in the ground to covering up the whole ground and catching all the possible sunlight energy hitting that field. In general, as we get later in the season, we like narrower rows and higher populations for that aspect of farming.
The other thing that we talk to people about all the time is don't give up on your crop, all right? Yes, we may be past the ideal window, but that doesn't mean that we still can't raise 80% of a crop, 90% of a crop, and when you start dollaring things out, it's really not that bad. But what ends up happening is people say, well, my expenses were gonna be this if I planted on time, now they're gonna be way down to here. That's never the way we should look at things. Okay, we don't ever want to just set a budget based on, all right, well, I think I'm going to do this. No, here's how we would suggest you do it. Look at each individual thing and ask yourself the question, is that going to pay for itself this year? So let's take insecticide, for example. We see a lot of people give up on insecticide and they have a bad bug problem. And I'm going, hey, you're going to lose 20 bushels. I don't care if your yield potential went from 60 down to 45. You're going to lose 20 bushels if you don't kill that bug. And people say, well, I can't spend the money because I planted late, so I don't have the potential there. No, you've got to look at each treatment, each individual thing you're going to do and ask whether or not it's worth it. Now, if we talk about fertilizer, that may be a little bit different because we know that a 60 bushel crop is not going to remove as much fertilizer as a 45 bushel soybean crop. Same thing with corn. 200 bushel corn is going to remove a lot more nutrients than 170 bushel corn. So absolutely on some things, we've got to adjust them down. But on other things, you simply need to look at return on investment.
So you have to plan for success and then adjust the plan as you go. If something happens where, hey, you know what, it's extreme drought, yeah, at some point you have to, call a spade and say, well, it's really not going to be that good a crop and I have to adjust all my thinking and base my return on investment on this year and what it's bringing me. But you have to start out thinking, wow, it's still going to be good. I have to protect myself and get myself off to a good start.
All right, let's say you get off to a good start, you planted early, but now you have hail or you have flooding or you have something that destroys at least a portion of your crop. With hail, they do have hail charts and you can look these up. Just do an internet search for hail charts. Iowa State, for example, they actually have a machine where they spray hail almost every day through the growing season, and they work in conjunction with the insurance companies, so they know exactly, on average, what you should get for potential based on a certain amount of defoliation at a certain stage of the crop.
Wouldn't that be a terrible job, Brian, to have to purposely put hail out onto a crop?
But hey, I'm glad that they've done that, so then we have a real good idea how much it hurts our crop. And anyway, the whole point here is if you're thinking about replanting versus just leaving the crop, you just talk to your insurance company and they'll tell you, hey, you've got 80% probability of yield by leaving it, and based on this planting date, we feel you have whatever, 75 or 80% if you plant at this late a date, so it might be a wash. But in some cases, hey, it's really not that late, and especially with soybeans, depending on where you're at in the country, you might be ahead to tear up whatever crop that was if there's 30% yield potential left, and you've got 80% yield planting today.
Well, there are a lot of tough decisions because the problem with hail or damage to a field is that it's not evenly spread across the field in most cases. Right. If it was even, you could make a really good judgment. But when you see, wow, in this area of the field it's down, this area of the field looks pretty good, that's where it gets to be a challenge. And you think about interseeding and you say, well, I could just interseed into a certain area. You have to think through those decisions real carefully too and seek some wise counsel because sometimes interseeding can be a problem. If you leave some current plants out there, they're going to be too much competition for those new plants coming. So if you're going to do that, be really cautious before you make that decision.
All right, one last thing that I guess I wanted to bring up is prevent plant or just flat out, hey, there's a hail event and I'm just going to plow it under and call it good. I'm going to take the insurance money and I'm done for the year. Okay, you can definitely do that if you want to. And in some cases in the short term, you'll turn out ahead. But we suggest you either plant a crop, even if it's a late planted crop, and take whatever you get, or at least put a cover crop in at some point because we want to have something growing out there to keep building your soil's organic matter, to keep the mycorrhiza fungi and a whole bunch of the beneficial bacteria still alive and ready for next year's crop, maybe to provide some more nitrogen for next year's crop. Just to get yourself ready, you're going to find that you'll get a lot higher yield if you put a crop in this year or at least a cover crop.
Well, there's certainly a lot of decisions to make if it's later later in the season and you're just trying to plant a crop for the first time, or considering the possibility of a replant situation. So just think through those decisions carefully. There's lots of data out there to take a look at for your particular area if you're in that kind of situation. Our strategy is just plan on a successful crop, do everything you can to get that off right, and look at the return on investment on each input that you put in, rather than setting a budget for yourself and saying, well, it's late in the year, I can only spend half as much money. That really doesn't make much financial sense.
And I guess one important thing I would leave you with is don't beat yourself up too much on this. A lot of people get so worried and so distraught by, hey, I had to replant, or boy, I couldn't get in the ground until late. You know what? That's just a part of farming. So you just have to calm down a little bit, take it easy, and do the best you can, try as hard as you can, and let it go at that.
Well, trying as hard as you can is very important if you're looking at our Weed of the Week. Can you identify this week's weed?